Mania, Fall Out Boy.
Was it that bad?
The 2018 album from one of the most legendary pop-punk bands who have changed directions quite a few times, and this album was an example of that. But Tim, was it a good example of changing directions?
Well, there was a lot of controversy surrounding it, mainly because the best way to describe it would be this is an experimental album. So a lot of the fans were a bit cautious on it. The singles that they released before this dropped were very questionable. But let's jump straight into it with the first track of Stay Frosty, Royal Milk Tea. What did you think?
Very strange track title to start off the album. You know, we're coming into a Fall Out Boy album and I didn't know what to expect here. I do think that this was a weird introduction, but set you up quite well for what you can expect in terms of the style of music. But one thing I want to say about this song is it felt really shouty. It felt really broken up and like... for no particular reason.
It was very aggressive as like an intro to the album. It was very punch you in the face, kind of trying to let you know what you were in for with the album. But it's not crazily out of pocket for Fall Out Boy's style. I didn't think it was that far away from what we've heard them do in the past. They've always used electronic samples and that kind of stuff in their music. So it wasn't that unexpected. There was a couple of lines like the "Are you smelling that shit?" that just made me cringe unbelievably.
What about the de Resistance?
Well, so I made a note on that. I thought it was cringe initially, but the more I listened to the track, the more I was like, oh, the resistance. I actually really like that line now. I thought, I don't know, it was fun to say, so fair play on that. But the lyrics for this album and this track in general are off to a very poor start, and I think that is something that follows through on the rest of the album, followed up by the track, The Last of the Real Ones. And can I just say, banger.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I actually didn't mind this either, you know. This was one of the more commercially successful songs from the album, if I remember correctly. I seem to have heard this many times throughout the years. And I think that this is much better than the first track, much catchier, and despite it not being so much stereotypical Fall Out Boy in terms of the angsty sound and lyrics, it was still really catchy and quite a fun listen.
Yeah, when the instruments kick in, that's when you really go, okay, this track's got some legs. Because you're the last of a dying breed. I love the chorus, honestly, slaps. And that's something that Fall Out Boy always excel with, is choruses and, catchy melodies and hooks. And Patrick's voice sells itself to catchy choruses very well. His voice is made to do these choruses.
And I thought it kept you interested as well. It brought it down, brought it back up. It built up really well towards the end. Despite there never been like a super exciting drop, there was a few moments where I was like, what's going to happen here? And it delivered on that.
For the album, this is like one of the most listened to tracks on Spotify. And this wasn't pushed as a single for some reason. I don't know why. There was a couple of other, I think it was Champion and Young and Menace that were the singles from this album, which are the roguish choices anyway. But I think if they'd have used this as a single and pushed it, it would have helped the album be received better and actually made people more excited to listen to it, rather than giving the most random track you've ever heard in your life. But moving off that, we go on to Hold Me Tight or Don't, which for some reason is all in uppercase, as is the title of the album Mania, but none of the other tracks are. And I don't know if they meant to do that or whether they just forgot. I don't know.
Giving my thoughts on this song is quite difficult because I feel like it was made for mums, but it wasn't particularly awful still. I didn't hate it. It just feels like a radio pop song that exists in that stratosphere completely. I think it's emphasized by the na-na-na-na-na-nas throughout it at multiple periods. It just feels like they want you to be in the car with the radio on and it playing. But if that is what they want, they've achieved it.
It's a weird ass like reggae core track. I don't know what to call it. But yes, I agree that another day, that stuttering was driving me mad because it wasn't just on single words that they do it. They do it for multiple words. And I think adding it into the beat in the instrumental, because they added that to kind of carry it through, terrible idea, and I don't like this track. I really don't like this track.
As I say, it wasn't my least favourite on the album, but we will move on to Wilson, Expensive Mistakes. What do you think of that one, Tim?
So, despite my previous comments on Patrick's voice, I do think that Patrick's voice on this track sounds particularly terrible, and I don't know if it's the effects that they've put on. There's a lot of heavy effects used throughout this album, and I just think, I think it ruins the track somewhat.
For me, it wasn't his particular singing on this that really offended me. It was more the lyrics themselves. It was really repetitive in moments, just saying the same lines 2 or 3 times outside of the chorus as well as in the chorus. And it's just like, the chorus is catchy, But when you hear that so many times, it sounded like to me he'd run out of things to say and had just had to put a song together. And it really sounded like an Imagine Dragons song.
The line, I'll stop wearing black when they make a darker colour. Initially you think, oh, you're edgy. Ooh, but then kind of goes hard, I can't lie. It does kind of go hard, and I kind of vibe with that. But the song itself, it feels very Fall Out Boy. It's got a lot of the classic Patrick whoa, whoa, oh, whoa, 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 whoas. So I can't say that it's a terrible track, but it didn't deviate much from what we've heard from Fall Out Boy in the past. I think it was just a bit throwaway for me.
Should we move on to Church, where he would get on his knees 7,000 times in 2 minutes?
Times, yeah. There's gospel samples throughout this, and this track, there's a couple of tracks in this album that feel very religious and gospel led, which I was very interested in seeing because I never expected that from Fall Out Boy. If you'd have said to me when Fall Out Boy first released the first couple of albums, I would never have thought that this would be the point that they would get to, that they'd be including gospel samples and making music that's kind of in a soul vibe.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It wasn't particularly horrible again. I feel like I keep saying that though, and at this point I got to the area where I'm like, I've been listening to the same song for the last 3 or 4 songs now. There's not much differentiation between the production of this and the last couple songs, so I'm like, I was a little bit bored.
There's the trap drums in it as well, which have featured prior to this, but this is the track where I think they shun through the most, and that's just bizarre to me. Fall Out Boy with trap drums, a bit weird. But shall we move on to Heaven's Gate?
So this one was a much calmer song than the previous few, and it actually addressed my concerns of getting a little bit bored in terms of everything sounding the same. I didn't mind this. I thought the vocals were quite nice in moments. It was less repetitive. It would have been amazing, but it's still quite repetitive, so it's not quite a track that I love. But I would say out of this entire album, this is maybe my favourite.
Wow, okay. I think this one's a lot more gospel-esque, and kind of what I was saying about the soul stuff, this track really cements that. And having one called Heaven's Gate Following Church, there's a definite religious vibe going on here. And as much as I say I'm not a fan of this type of track all the time, I do think this lets you realise how good Patrick's vocals actually are, because they're phenomenal on this.
I think it's the vocals and it's the simple instrumental where sometimes something doesn't have to be overcomplicated. You don't need a million sounds. Concentrate on the vocal, let the instrumental build it up and take it back down a few times. Keeps me interested, and just a very effective song. So should we move on to Champion?
Weird, like almost rap-like flow, and I really don't like it when clean vocalists decide, you know what, I'm going to do this song, I'm going to try and rap. It just doesn't work for me.
For me, it feels like there's no benefit in living through this song. It just existed in an album that, I don't know, it really annoyed me, this song. It was like motivational for the sake of being motivational, but without saying anything meaningful.
Yeah, I was really not sure of what they were doing with this track, and it felt like it was way too aimed at radio play, and it was a very bold and strange choice, because this was one of the singles. This was the second single for this album. What an odd choice.
It's one of the worst songs that is on the album.
Yeah,
why would they choose that for a single? Do you want to talk about it more, or should we go on to Sunshine Riptide featuring Burna Boy?
Let's move off it as fast as possible. And can I just say, what a crazy feature, Burna Boy. What the hell is he doing on
Really strange flow at the start of this. Again, though, matching it. It just was a what is happening? This is not Fall Out Boy.
The one upside to this track is Pete Wentz has an amazing bass line, and he has come on leaps and bounds since Fall Out Boy started. And I think it was around 1 minute 10. It just sounds phenomenal. But then when Burna Boy's verse is at the same time as Pete Wentz' bass, so you can kind of listen to that and ignore Burna Boy's lyrics. But it fits the track. It doesn't fit Fall Out Boy. So with this being a Fall Out Boy track, doesn't work for me.
For me, it fit in with the theme of the album in terms of repetition very well. I felt like I heard the chorus a bunch of times, and it started to really annoy me at this point, because I've noticed in multiple tracks, and I'm like, well, if you don't have what to say, then why not just wait another year to put it out? Do you know what I mean? But the first couple tracks, it wasn't so bad, but now I'm like, oh, again, you're just going to say the chorus 17 times every song.
It feels very rushed, I think, as a whole. But we move off that onto possibly the best track off the album, which is Young and Menace.
This absolutely stinks. This track made me feel like I was having a panic attack.
Why?
It was just loud, not well put together. It sounded like someone had just got a MIDI keyboard with loads of different sounds and just started slamming it against the wall.
I really, really like this track. So the first couple of times I heard it, I kind of thought, what the hell has happened to Fall Out Boy? Because this was the very first single for this album, which in itself, unbelievably controversial. I can admit that the vocals are very jarring. The production of the song is very bizarre and not what we'd come to expect. So having this out of nowhere, weirdest choice ever. But I think the difference in this track and the experimentation on it, and honestly, it's so different that it intrigues me to a point that I enjoy it. And the chorus slaps.
I think you enjoy it just because it's different, not because it's actually a good song within the genre that it's trying to fit in.
I am a bit of a contrarian, so when I heard this and I heard everybody hating it, I thought, you know what, I'm going to learn to love this track. And I have to say it worked, because I do think this is a phenomenal track. I really, really like it, and I would say this is possibly my favourite from the album.
Well, fair enough, but I don't think I could ever learn to love this track. Honestly, by the time that last drop was coming round, I desperately wanted this to end. It felt like it was giving me a migraine. So let's move on to Bishop's Knife Trick.
So this is the last track on the album, and I think it's a great choice for an outro track. What did you reckon?
I thought it brought the vibes down quite nicely, and I appreciated it more than some of the other tracks that we've heard, but I still do think that it was very similar in nature to 80% of what we've seen on this record. Not that that would usually be a negative, but it is when I've not particularly loved 80% of what's been on the record.
Yeah. No, I do agree that there's been a lot of misses on this, but the chorus for this track in particular was very well constructed, I thought, and it makes me wish that the rest of the album was kind of made in this style that this last track was. I don't really have too much more to say other than it was a decent track.
Well, let's move on to some thoughts about the album as a whole. I'll go first here, because I actually think the first half of this album was okay. There was a couple good tracks in there, very pop focused, very much tracks that you feel like were made to be played on a radio. But they were still decent and I enjoyed them. I could vibe with them, catchy choruses, catchy melodies. And I was like, okay, fair enough. And then I feel like as we got into the latter sections of the album, it just started being uninspired and all over the place.
Yeah, there was a lot of, like you've mentioned many times, repetition throughout. And you have to wonder, did they very quickly rejig the entire album because they released Young and Menace and realized everybody fucking hated it? Did they then go, oh crap, we need to really redo all this? And something that lends itself to that theory, I would say, is the one track with all caps and the album title being in all caps. I would expect the rest to be. So I don't know if they went, shit, we're going to have to scrap half of these songs because they all sound like Young and Menace. We need to find a different sound to go with. It feels very rushed, and I think overproduced is being kind. There's a lot of heavy production on this, and with only 35 minutes, did they then rush to cut out a bunch of songs and fill it with choruses? Did they have to pad out the tracks by adding 1,000 choruses in?
Yeah, the thing that annoyed me most throughout this was that repetition in lyrics, not just in the chorus sections, but it happened a lot of times where you'd start a song and then say the exact same line a second time that's not even in the chorus, and I was like, it's just so lazy to me. And I think without that, and with a little bit more care and crafting of a few of the other songs, it could have actually been a good album.
So I respect them for how experimental they were on this album, because it takes a lot for a band of that caliber to say, you know what, we're going to completely change the direction that we're going in with this. And a lot of it didn't work. I will say that a lot of it did not work. But as far as the tracks that did work, I thought they were phenomenal. There's a lot of gems buried away in here that perhaps aren't given the time of day that they should. But let's go on to decide if Mania by Fall Out Boy was really that bad. Was it?
I don't know.
For me, I'll just come out and say no. As a Fall Out Boy album or not, I don't think this album is that bad. I really don't.
I think if I could just cut out, if it was an EP, I'd say no. But because it is a full album, and for the latter half of it, I just wanted to turn it off, I'm going to have to say that I think it was that bad.
Oh, fair enough.
Again, the first half, decent. Second half really let it down for me. But if you don't think it was that bad, Tim, what would you rate it out of 10?
It's coming in at 5 out of 10. A solid 5 out of 10 for me. I think half of it was great, half of it was not great. And to me, we've done this in the past. If we think that, it comes in at a 5.
Well, so if you had a scale here, you'd be putting it bang at mid.
Mid, yeah. Yeah,
Right.
mid. So it's not bad. It's not bad, but it's not good. It's far from being good.
Well, I'd give this album a 4 out of 10.
Okay.
I think there was a few moments where I enjoyed it, but the majority of it I didn't. But if you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit like and subscribe. We've done a bunch of this style of video for massive albums throughout the years, so go check them out.
Thank you very much for watching.